Hello, and welcome to Weekend Wisdom. I'm Tracy Whitney, your host for this short podcast that is both practical and implementable. We create short tips and practical advice based on the questions that you send us. So if you want to send a question to info@creatingafamily.org, we'll comb through our archives, listen to recent conversations that we've had with guest experts, and craft an answer that will hopefully strengthen your family. Again, if you have a question that you think would fit this format, email it to info@creatingafamily.org. Today's question comes from a listener named Paige. She says, I'm aware of the reasons that a domestic infant adoption may fail, but I've also read about foster children having failed adoptions and then aging out of the system. What are some of the main reasons that a foster child experiences a failed adoption, and how does that look different than or the same as a failed infant adoption? Thank you for the work on this podcast. It's been extremely helpful for me in our journey of adoption. Well, Paige, thank you for writing to us, and thank you for your kind words about our work. We love supporting families like yours. Before we dive into the factors that may lead to failed foster care adoptions, I want to make sure I'm making a distinction that might be pertinent in this particular question. Failed adoptions, that is the legal action of dissolving an adoptive relationship, are different than the failed adoption matches that are more common in domestic infant adoption. So a failed adoption match is when an expectant mother or expectant mother and father change their mind about placing a child for adoption even before the baby's born or before the revocation period is over. This could happen because of a variety of reasons, and we covered that pretty succinctly in a Weekend Wisdom that we recorded back in February called How Common Are Failed Adoption Matches? It was February of 2024. So if you want to go back and look at that, you could get some information about failed adoption matches. If you're looking for other information about failed adoption matches, you can check out the resource notes in today's episode. However, I want to distinguish that from failed foster adoptions and kids aging out of the system without permanency. It's helpful to remember that the research shows us that the reasons a foster care adoption fails are not all that different from other adoption types and why they fail. So we'll dive into that in a second. But the good news that you must hear at this point is that research shows us most adoptions do not fail. Failed adoptions, again, are the legal process of dissolving the adoptive relationship, and they happen for a wide variety of reasons across all types of adoption. It's much less common in domestic infant adoption than in foster care adoption or international adoption. And the important distinction to that is that the children available for adoption, either in foster care or international adoption, have usually experienced neglect, abuse, prenatal substance exposure, and other life trauma that impacts their developing brain and thus their behaviors, which we'll hear later is a clue to risk factors for failed adoptions. So the research shows us that from the child's side of adoption, there are two main factors that contribute to a failed adoption. And again, failed adoption meaning a dissolved adoption through the legal process of separating that relationship. So the first factor is the child's age at the time of placement prior to the adoption. So the older the child is at placement in the home that will become its permanent placement, the more likely they are to experience instability. The highest risk categories then are for the tweens and teens who get placed. The second factor is the child's behaviors in that adoptive placement. As those children have been growing up without permanency thus far, their behaviors are more ingrained, their coping mechanisms are more habitual, and therefore harder to relearn new, healthier coping mechanisms. The two most common behaviors that lead to a failed adoption include impacts from sexual abuse, sexualized behaviors, and then the aggressive or violent behaviors. So research shows us that these failures from the child side of things are age at placement and behavior during the placement. Now let's turn to the parent side of things. Research shows us that the parents' side of things is much less subjective to their age or their career or their education or their income status, any of those other demographics. Instead, there's a few key factors that contribute to adoption failure from the parents' side of things. The first is something that we talk a lot about here at Creating a Family, and that's unrealistic or mismatched expectations. So that could be from parents that have come into this adoption match with a lot of previous experience, and they're unwilling or unable to shift that experience to meet the needs of the child that's in front of them. It could be that their expectations are so idealized, and even if they've been educated, they maybe tend to think that's not going to happen to me. Adjusting to the reality of the child, again, that you have right in front of you is really hard to do if you can't let go of those idealized expectations. And then, of course, safety issues are not included in that expectation. We should all be able to maintain an expectation of a safe, stable placement for the children where people who live in the home already or the people that are coming into the home can stay physically safe. A second factor for parents would be an unwillingness or an inability to be nimble, responsive, flexible in parenting style, or to keep learning. Both of those things, that nimble responsiveness and the commitment to keep learning, can really improve adoption stability and improve the chances of success. So when we're not willing to be flexible or we're not willing to be nimble, that's a factor that can impact and lead to an adoption failure. Another factor would be the misunderstanding of a child's behaviors and of the impacts that trauma may have had on that child's brain, on that child's behavior, and then on that child's ability or flexibility to learn. So when you don't understand the full breadth of trauma in general, and then the trauma that that child experienced, you won't necessarily understand why they behave the way they do. And that can lead to a feeling as if you can't continue with this adoption. And finally, lack of support. Again, this is a big one for Creating a Family. It's why we exist. We want parents to be supported and strengthened and educated. But when adoptive families do not surround themselves with support like therapy, family counseling, individual therapy for the parents, individual therapy for the children, but also support groups and safe means of contacting or staying open with the child's birth family if that's available. It also includes some of the challenges and lack of support that parents might feel from the system that they're involved with, whether it's international adoption or foster care adoption. If they don't feel like they're getting support from the professionals in that area, they often will indicate that that is a reason that they felt like their adoption would have failed. There you have it. There's 4 things from the parent side: lack of support, misunderstanding of a child's behavior, unwillingness or inability to be nimble, and mismatched or unrealistic expectations. The good news is that all 4 or 5 of those factors are things that we adoptive parents can do something about. We have the ability to educate ourselves. We have the ability to surround ourselves with support. We have the ability to choose flexibility and nimbleness to meet the needs of the child that is right in front of us. And with that good news, I wanted to let you know that if you're interested in learning more about how to prevent an adoption from failing in your own life or sharing information with others about how to prevent an adoption failure in their lives, you can check out our most recent podcast called Help, I Don't Think I Can Continue with This Adoption. We recorded it and released it in March of 2025. It's a great overview of the things that lead to adoption failures and then the things that we can do as a community and as parents and caregivers to prevent that from happening. We'd love it if you could go to the platform where you listen to this episode of Weekend Wisdom and leave us a rating or a review. Your response like that is always really helpful for us to get this content and other content like it into the hands of other families who could use the strength and the support. And if you are looking for additional resources about adoption failures, you can check the show notes. We've got some resources listed there for you. Thanks so much. Have a great day.